Okay, could I have your attention, please? There are a lot of teachers in this room, and they probably say, all right, would you please take your seats? Oops. First of all, welcome to this senior college class. It's called the Veterans Experience since it's Veterans Day coming up tomorrow. You know, the class was organized to honor those men and women who have given their time to military service, to protect our freedoms and to protect all of us. The date of the class was also carefully selected because it is the day before the national holiday of Veterans Day. The class site was also carefully selected. The American Legion Hall is really the center of veteran affairs here at Fort Kent. Tonight we were going to have 4 panelists. I'm sure Gary Dumont will come in shortly. But we have panelists who have served in the military. 3 of them have served during the Vietnam era, which began in 1955 and ended in 1975. Although the conflict started in 1955, the American involvement in the conflict didn't begin until 1964. The 4th member of the panel served in the Afghanistan War. This conflict began in 2001 and lasted until 2021. Each of the panelists was given a list of 5 questions to answer. Although the questions are very similar for each of them, you'll discover that their stories and their presentations on these 5 questions will be totally different. The panelists include Norm Fournier, Jody Cody, Melford Pelletier, and probably Gary Dumont should be here. And here's Gary. Come on here, Gary.
Time to spare, go by ear.
Oh.
Perfect time.
Hi, Gary.
Hey, do you? Sure. In addition to the panel, we will be having a flag folding demonstration by members of the Fort Kent American Legion Hall, Post 133 here in Fort Kent. You know, many of us have seen flag folding ceremonies, especially at funerals. However, today, we're going to learn about the American flag and the significance of each fold while doing the demonstration. Today's flag folding team include Jean-Louis Michaud and Edmund Pelletier, who is actually going to be doing the folding, and Lincoln Gendreau is going to give us the text of the flag folding and the different folds. But before we start, I would let us to please stand, and we're going to face the flag and pledge our allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. But before we really begin, one more. I'd like to ask all of us to take a moment and have a moment of silence for all those veterans who have served but are no longer with us. But also those veterans who are actually in the service right now in different parts of the country, in this country, and throughout the world. So if you would please bow your heads for a moment of silence. Thank you. I'd like to begin by inviting Lincoln Gendreau, and we're going to be having a flag folding demonstration. Lincoln? You've done that.
Want me to go over there? Thank you. Good afternoon. Today we would like to demonstrate the traditional ceremony that we do at funerals of our fellow veterans. The flag folding ceremony is very solemn and brings back personal memories to each one of us. But the folding of the flag has a lot of meaning. Today, we are taking a few minutes of this meeting to do the flag folding ceremony to remind us of why we do the ceremony and the meanings of each fold to honor the greatest symbol that represents our nation, the United States of America. Before starting the ceremony, let me give you a brief history of the country's greatest symbol, the American flag. For more than 200 years, the American flag has been the symbol of our nation's unity, as well as a source of pride and inspiration for millions of citizens. Born on June 14, 1777, the Second Continental Congress determined that the flag of the United States be 13 stripes, alternating between 7 red and 6 white, and that the Union be 13 stars, white in a blue field, representing a new constellation. Between 1777 and 1960, the shape and design of the flag evolved into the flag that will be presented before you today. The 13 original stripes represent the original 13 colonies, while the stars represent the 50 states of the Union. The colors of the flag are symbolic as well. Red symbolizes hardiness and valor. White signifies purity and innocence, and blue represents vigilance, perseverance, and justice. Traditionally, a symbol of liberty, the American flag has carried the message of freedom and inspired Americans both at home and abroad. In 1814, Francis Scott Key was so moved at seeing the Stars and Stripes waving after the British shelling of Baltimore's Fort McHenry that he wrote the words to the Star-Spangled Banner. In 1892, the flag also inspired Francis Bellamy to write the Pledge of Allegiance, our most famous flag salute and patriotic oath. In July of 1969, the American flag was flown in space when Neil Armstrong planted it on the surface of the moon. By displaying the flag and giving it a distinctive fold, we show respect to the flag and express our gratitude to those individuals who fought and continue to fight for freedom at home and abroad. The United States flag represents who we are. It stands for the freedom we all share and the pride and patriotism we feel for our country. Demonstrators post. A properly folded flag has 13 folds in a triangle, representing the 13 original colonies. When folded, no red or white stripe is to be evident, leaving only the blue field with stars. The first fold of our flag is a symbol of life. The second fold signifies our belief in eternal life. The third fold is made in honor and tribute of the veterans departing our ranks, who gave a portion of their life for the defense of our country to obtain peace throughout the world. The fourth fold represents our weaker nature, for as American citizens, trusting in God, it is up to Him. We turn in times of peace as well as in time of war for His divine guidance. The fifth fold is a tribute to our country. For in the words of Stephen Decatur, our country, in dealing with other countries, may she always be right, but it's still our country, right or wrong. The sixth fold is for where our hearts lie. It is with our heart that we pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, and with liberty and justice for all. The seventh fold is a tribute to our armed forces, for it is through the armed forces that we protect our country and our flag against all her enemies, whether they are found within or without the boundaries of our republic. The eighth fold is a tribute to the one who entered into the valley of the shadow of death, that we might see the light of day. The ninth fold is a tribute to the womanhood and mothers, for it has been through their faith, their love, loyalty, and devotion that the character of men and women who have made this country great has been molded. The 10th fold is a tribute to the Father, for He too has given His sons and daughters for defense of our country since they were first born. The 11th fold represents the lower portion of the seal of King David and King Solomon, and glorifies in the Hebrews' eyes the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The 12th fold represents an emblem of eternity and glorifies in the Christian's eyes God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The 13th fold, or when the flag is completely folded, the stars are uppermost, reminding us of our nation's motto, "In God we trust." After the flag is completely folded and tucked in, it takes on the appearance of a cocked hat, ever reminding us of the soldiers who served under General George Washington, and the sailors and Marines who served under Captain John Paul Jones, who were followed by their comrades and shipmates in the armed forces of the United States, preserving for us the rights, privilege, and freedoms we enjoy today. The next time you see a flag folding ceremony honoring someone that has served our country, either in the armed forces or in our civilian services, such as police force or fire department, keep in mind all the important reasons behind each and every movement. They have paid the ultimate sacrifice for all of us. Thank you very much for your attention and respect for the American flag. Dismissed.
Good job, guys. Thank you, American Legion, Legionnaires, for doing this great ceremony. It's a very moving ceremony. And now I'd like to introduce each member of the panel and invite them to come up to the podium. All of the panelists have been given 5 questions. However, you will see that each veteran will have a different experience when answering each of the 5 questions. The first panelist is Norman Fournier. Norm was born and raised in Wallagrass. He is a graduate of Fort Kent Community High School. He continued his education at the University of Maine at Fort Kent and received a bachelor's degree in elementary education. Then he went to Orono, where he completed studies in a doctoral program in U.S. history. He was then drafted into the U.S. Army, where he served 2 years. After being discharged from the military, he began his 40-year career in health and social services positions as Director of Children's Services and as the first Executive Director of the Aroostook County Action Program. He also served as the Associate Administrator at Northern Maine Medical Center, as the Chief Executive Officer of Fish River Rural Health. Along with his work career, Norm has been extremely active in the community, as well as in county government. Norm has been active on many boards in Aroostook County, including the Board of Directors for the Maine Human Rights Commission, United Way of Aroostook, MSAD 27, Maine Employers Mutual Insurance Company, the Aroostook County Transportation System, St. Joseph's Parish Council, the University of Maine at Fort Kent Trustees, the Wallagrass Board of Appeals, Aroostook County Commissioners, Northern Maine Commission, Ambulance Service Incorporated, Fish River Rural Health, and the Aroostook House of Comfort. Norm was recently honored by the Aroostook County Action Program by having a new ACAP building named for him, the Norman L. Fournier Place. The facility will help people by providing housing, meals, and help to find employment. May I present Norman Fournier.
Thank you, John, for your very generous comments. I ought to hire you to write my obituary. Seriously, thank you again. One of the first questions that we were given is, what prompted you to join the military? And as Don mentioned, I was drafted in the military in 1969. And after receiving 6 military deferments to attend college, some people in the room might think that some of us were draft dodgers, but in the end, we were not. So after 4 years at the University of Maine and Fort Kent, and then at ONO in a doctoral program, and a teaching assistant, Katrina Anderson, who was the Board of Veterans of Affairs or whatever, who was in charge of Draft board, that's what I'm trying to say. Caught up with us, some of us anyway. The second question was, where and what was your basic training experience? My basic training was Fort Dix, New Jersey, starting in June 1969. And the question was also, what it was like? For me, I found it very hard and demanding. We had drill sergeants that were very gung-ho, just come back from Vietnam, and some of us believed that their only purpose in life was to make life miserable. And I think the fact that most of us in our unit were college graduates that had received many deferments, like myself, 6 years, and that we were much older, and it mattered. I mean, I was 24 years old. We had people in our unit in basic training that were 25, 26, even one gentleman 27 years old. And, you know, the average age was probably around 24 and 25 years. We were told quite often that we had been on the gravy train, that we did not experience what they experienced in Vietnam and in military service. And their sole purpose was for us to experience the military life. And, you know, I say miserable because we were one of these units that in 8 weeks of training, we had 1 free weekend and a holiday. And Don alluded to it a while ago when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. That was the only day off that we got in 8 weeks. And I would venture to say that 95% of people in the unit, college graduates, upon completion of basic training, receive an MOS, which is a military occupation specialty of 11 Bravo, which is infantry. And that, by receiving that MOS, you were practically guaranteed that you would end up in Vietnam. And from basic, I was assigned to Fort Lewis, Washington for 9 weeks of advanced infantry training. Next question was given to us was, where was your first duty station after training? And my first duty station was the Republic of South Vietnam. And after having been trained for 5 months, the irony of that is that that's not much training for any occupation. To become a teacher, they trained me for 4 years. So it was a rude awakening for some of us to all of a sudden, after 4.5 months, to be thrown in Vietnam and the rice paddies of the Mekong Delta. What type of work did you do in the military? First 5 months in Vietnam were spent, as I mentioned, the rice paddy of the Mekong Delta with the 9th Infantry Unit, and I was a radio man, carried the radio. And at the time, General Westmoreland, who was in charge of all troops in Asia, his mission basically was to, and he would emphasize that often, was to capture or hunt down the enemy Viet Cong, which was guerrillas trained by North Vietnamese or and they were communist sympathizers, or the NVA, which was troops from North Vietnam. Most days, we were picked up by helicopter flown by individuals here like Gary that would drop us off in some rice paddies where it was reported that there were some enemy activity. Usually that would happen late in the afternoon, and we'd walk up a couple of miles on the rice paddies and set up an ambush on the rice paddies. We would set up claymores, which is nothing more than mines on each end of the trail, and wait for the enemy to walk in an ambush. Keep in mind, in that area, around 7 o'clock or so, these areas were free fighter zones. In other words, it didn't matter who you were. If you were out there, you were the target. So people did not come out of their houses, or their hooch, we called them, and start walking around. And we were usually in the field for 2 or 3 days. Helicopters would come back and pick us up, after each mission. After 5 months or so, by luck and coincidence, I came out of the field and became a company clerk. That was an administrative position which many days I found more challenging and depressing than being in the field. The next question that we were given was, what is your most memorable experience in the military? Well, I have more than one. I got 3 or 4 that come to mind, and I was sharing with Melford and Don a while ago that when you look back, it's been 53 years, I believe, so some things don't come back as quickly as they should. I remember my first mission, and we were picked up by a helicopter, and we were taken in the Delta, and we were dropped off in the rice paddies. Now keep in mind, and Gary will verify that, these helicopters were big targets for people on the ground that might be shooting at you. So first mission, keep in mind that when you infantry training, I had never been in a helicopter before, and this is not something they teach you, how to get in and get off and move on. And the first mission, and plus I'm afraid of heights. So first mission, we get dropped off, and the helicopter pilot wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. So he went down about, I would say, 7 or 8 feet from the ground. And little did I know, until I watched my fellow infantrymen, that people started jumping out of the helicopter. Well, dummy here, being afraid of heights, stayed on the helicopter. Helicopter went back up, and I said, what do I do now? So I go over and tap the pilot, and he looks around and he says, what the? And I won't say the other word. And he says, what am I going to do with you? I said, well, you better come down lower because I'm not getting off this chopper. So he did, and after a few choice words, which I'm sure Gary would have given me also. Out in the field was very interesting because, especially after our mission was done at night, the next day we'd go out and try to set up camp or get ready for the next ambush. And so we had quite a bit of time on our hands, and we'd walk the paddies and get to see a lot of the natives, a lot of the people. Well, as most of you know, Vietnam was occupied by the French for a number of years as a colony. So I had the opportunity to use my French, and even though some days their French was a lot different than mine, but we could communicate. And I remember one day, it was about 105 degrees, and we'd been in the rice paddies all day, and we came to this house, or we call them hooch, not much of a house, and there was this old lady standing by the door. So I thought I'd be smart and at least introduce myself in French and have a conversation, which we did. And very nice lady, and so we, after about a couple of minutes, he said, invited me in her old house. So I go in, and the smell was unbelievably good. I mean, and I'm saying, ooh, I wonder if she'll offer me anything to eat after sea rations. So she did. So brings me to the table, and there was this big black kettle that she had food in. It was like a fireplace, open pit. And she offered me a bowl of soup, and gave me a bowl, and it was one of the best soups that I've ever had. But you got to remember, after you've been in the field and eating sea rations, anything would have tasted good. No, but it was excellent. Big chunks of meat and whatever. So I finished my soup, and she comes over and said, in French, you want? If it's not what I know, oui. So she gives me another bowl of soup, and we carry the conversation, and I'd been in there for about an hour, and ready to leave. And so I thanked her profusely, and as I'm leaving, she, come over here. So I follow her instructions. I go to where the pot was of soup, and she takes this big ladle, puts it in, lifts it up, and then she's holding the carcass of a rat by the tail. Well, believe me, I made it as far as the door, and then my stomach was empty. Another memorable memory experience that came to mind, that came to mind last night was, I mentioned to you that we'd set ambushes on the trails, and everything would be free fire zone, that whatever moved you could shoot. And so one night about 2 o'clock in the morning, all hell breaks loose. I mean, these claymores go on, trip fires, flares, and everybody, excited, of course, and start firing, and you could hear shots. I mean, for about 15 minutes, we thought we were being invaded by the North Vietnamese or whatever. But finally, somebody smartened up and said, hey, nobody's firing at us. Did we get them all? No. So finally, our platoon leader, a second lieutenant, said, hey guys, a couple of you got to go out there and see what we have for border count. Well, they do, and all of a sudden you hear the laughter. I mean, what's going on? I mean, we had called in as the radio person. I'd called in artillery, and it's really quite something to see here in the middle of the night. So they come back, and I said, come on, guys, come and look at this. So we go out, and we had shot an old man's 2 pigs that were coming down the trail. I mean, bullet holes all over those 2 animals. But I do have to say that we were pretty good about it, because the next morning our platoon leader or whatever, we did go to the older man's house, the gentleman, and we did make reparation and pay for the 2 pigs. And time is up here, so. The last item is, that sticks to my memory after 50 years is company clerk. I thought that when I came out of the field that this was going to be a plush assignment, that I'd be sleeping in a bed and I wouldn't have to worry about people shooting at me. But I found that probably more gut-wrenching than being in the field. And the reason for that is, as company clerk every morning, many mornings, I dreaded to go to work, because that's when you get the reports from the field, how many people got injured, what happened out there, and you had to forward that to battalion or whatever. The part that I dreaded the most, and to this day still have vivid memories, is when we had one of our fellow soldiers get killed from our unit. And one of the tasks as company clerk, which I quickly found out, was that when that happened and they came back, when the platoon came back and with the identification, the dog tags or what they called them, one of the tasks was to go to that individual's foot locker or his locker and to clean it out and decide what you would be sending home to the family. And I found that very depressing at times and gut-wrenching, for the fact that you open somebody's locker, you see a picture of the wife, you see a picture of the kids, and in our unit, like I mentioned before, mostly people 24, 25, 26 years of age that had had deferments, and they were older, they were married, they had kids. And every morning when that would happen, it was gut-wrenching. And not only did you have to pack all the stuff, but you had to be careful what you sent back to the family. I mean, there are some letters there that, who knows where they might have come from. And, we were told to read them to make sure that they were appropriate to send back home. And then you'd come back, and our battalion had a policy that the company clerk had to write a letter or a draft, at least a draft letter, on what happened in the field. So you had to talk to the people that were in the field and try to get as much information as possible, and draft something that, that sounded reasonable and made sense to a wife or kids or a mother or a father. So that was the part that I dreaded most, and the part that I agonized the most many days, knowing that somebody, whoever was going to receive that letter, was, going to be a tragedy. So that was it. And the other, and I'm sure Melford will mention it too, one of our close friends that got killed in Vietnam was in our unit. Percy Gaio, who was a teacher in Grand Isle and graduated from University of Maine at Fort Kent with us. And I had the opportunity to come home with his body, and decided really that I don't think I could, because I thought if I came home back to the States, I don't know if I'd want to go back. So with that, thank you very much. I probably spoke
Norm, thank you. I mean, not just thank you for the presentation, but thank you for the service. And not just in the military, but to the community. Thank you. The next panelist is Jody Cody. Jody is from Fort Kent and the daughter of Edmund Peltier and Peggy. Actually, Edmund was one of the persons that folded the flag in the demonstration. Jody is a graduate of Fort Kent Community High School. She went on to the University of Maine at Presque Isle, where she received an associate's degree in medical lab technology. She then returned to Fort Kent, where she completed her Bachelor of Science degree in nursing. She then went on to Waldron University, where she earned a master's degree in psychiatric nursing practitioner. She began working at Northern Maine Medical Center as a psychiatric inpatient unit, or in the psychiatric patient unit. And recently she became working as a mental health outpatient specialist with Pines Health Services. Jody's military service began in 1998. I didn't think she was that old. When she joined the National Guard, she remained in the Guard for 15 years. During this time, she had 2 deployments to Afghanistan. The first in 2006 and the second one in 2009. May I present Jody Peltier.
Sorry, I was expecting to be the last one. So I'll just go over thank you for the introduction, and I see a lot of my former teachers here, so thank you. What prompted you to join the military? A lot had to do with my father. My grandfather was a medic in World War II, and of course the real intention was back then they were paying a lot for college education. So I joined in '98, and back then with the National Guard, because all of the National Guard units in Aroostook County were artillery, I couldn't serve with them because I was a female. So I had to drive to Bangor every month for training. I was in the 112th Air Ambulance Unit. That was my first unit that I went to. So where was my basic training? My basic training was in Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and they called it Relaxin' Jackson. It was a co-ed. It was a co-ed basic training, so females were on one floor, males were on the other floor. Of course, back then, in 1998, I know you guys had it rough with basic training, but we still had it rough. The female drill sergeants were the worst because they knew that we could tolerate more than so. But and then my second part of training, because I was still in college, I did what's called I can't remember exactly what it was called, but I did basic training one summer and then my advanced training the next summer. I went to Fort Lee, Virginia for unit supply. Yeah, and the reason why I went into unit supply was because my recruiter, at the time, he told me my intention, because I was going to college, was to become an officer. So he told me, he says, you could go 2 avenues. Either you could go supply or you could go administration. So I went supply because I felt it was, I felt it was interesting. Logistics in general was interesting. So I did that. I came home. My first duty station was, it was the air, no, I didn't go back there. I think it was, when did I come back? Went back to the air ambulance, and then back when they changed everything as far as females in the artillery and back the front line, they're set up a unit in Limestone. It was, it was a maintenance company. So I transferred there. So fortunately, I didn't have to travel as much. And then the deployments as far as Iraq and Afghanistan was starting, they were pulling back a lot of the active army and a lot of the active duty. And they activated a lot of National Guard troops. So I was transferred to another unit because they apparently liked my resume. Back then, if there was a slot open, they would go to other units and pull people. So I went to the 240th Engineer Group.
Geez, I was in both those. I was in the 112th and I was in the 240th.
240th, it's not the 240th anymore, they changed it. So in 2000, from 2006 to 2007, of course, National Guard, because they weren't active duty, we weren't trained, so we had to go to a mobilization station first for 3 months, and then wear boots on the ground for 12 months. And then you come back for it. So it's a total of 18 months I was away from home. I don't think I did my 2 weeks of leave. No, the second deployment I didn't. We had 2 weeks of leave and we got to go to Qatar. That was for a pass. That was interesting. So what I did in the 240th Engineer Group was I did supply, but it was more of a brigade level. So the engineers at the time were, I don't know if you look at the map of Afghanistan, there's a ring route. And so there was essentially no roads in Afghanistan, so we were building, it was a construction company that was building that. So what I had to do was I had to go to the division level and basically solicit money for our projects. I got told off by a lot of colonels, and that's how I built my thick skin. I had to pay a lot of Afghan interpreters. I think the Afghan money was 19 to 1, 19 Afghan dollars to 1. So at one time I would have like $1 million of Afghan money in my backpack and bringing it to pay these interpreters. So that was our mission, was to build the roads, and that was what I did, that deployment. I came back in 07 and to the 286 Engineer, 286 Combat Supply Battalion, and that's when I met my husband. His name is Jesse Cody. He took a promotion into that unit, and the National Guard at that time, they were allowing us to have, I don't know if it was 2 years home before we could redeploy, because they were having us deploy quite often. But I volunteered for this deployment because I felt the need to go with my unit. I didn't see the point of staying behind when they're leaving without me. And it's different in National Guard because we're more, it's like a second family. So I deployed again in 2009, and I was the same battalion supply. I essentially did the same projects. My husband was there too, so it was nice. We weren't married at the time, but we still got to spend a lot of time together. I was in Kandahar, so Kandahar was, it was a coalition base, and there was a lot of Canadians there. So we had a Tim Hortons, and we had a Pizza Hut, and there was a hockey rink because Canadians were pretty, they still like to do their hockey. So they had French there, they had Italians, England was there. I was really hoping to catch Prince Harry, but I never did. And then we came back home, and so I stayed in until 2013. because when we got married, my husband and I, he was a warrant officer, a maintenance warrant officer. We decided that it was best for the family that I would get out. And because if we were looking to start a family, because my husband ended up deploying for his third tour in 2013. Jacob was a year and a half. And I'll have to tell you, that was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, was stay behind and watch my husband leave. It's still pretty hard. I still think about it and I still get, because it was probably one of the darkest times of my life, having him leave without me and me knowing what goes on. And fortunately, that was when the Afghanistan war was paring down and they were packing stuff up and coming over. So that's one of the reasons why I got out. I get asked a lot of questions. You did 15 years, why didn't you stay in? But I had to do it. I had to get out. And my husband has he did his 20 years, he retired, and we still get the benefits. And I still get to go to Togus, and it's pretty hard. It was pretty tough. In hindsight, I'm really glad I got out, because when he would come back, I would have had to leave again. So it was too hard. And fortunately, I thank the government, because I was able to have what's called the post 9/11 GI Bill. And because I had so many days overseas, they covered 100% of my tuition. So, and a lot of the reasons why I went to mental health was because I wanted to help veterans. And between my tours, I did have to see a therapist with the Caribou VA, and they do telehealth. And I really wanted to, and I tried to lobby to have them have a provider there, but they still want to do a lot of telehealth. And of course, COVID changed everything, and some of the veterans get it right in their own home. So, fortunately, I worked at Northern Maine Medical Center for 3 years, and I definitely learned a lot under Dr. Overton. Him too. He's a Marine Corps veteran, and he expected a lot from me. But I'm back in Caribou, so I don't have to travel, so that's what's nice. Memorable experience in the military? There was my first deployment. There was one mission that had to happen. It was a medical mission. They did a lot of medical missions, even though I was unit supply. I volunteered. And we went to a place called Herat. It's on the other side of Afghanistan. And we had special forces there, and we did. Afghanistan is very poor. They live in mud houses, and they don't have any health care. So I went with a Navy nurse practitioner that was with me, and I basically gave deworming medication to all the kids. And it was definitely something that I think about often, because I realize what we have and how grateful I am with what we have. And it's hard to see, because you see a lot of the Afghan higher ups, and they're rich, and nothing goes to the poor. It was pretty sad. But and then besides meeting my husband, so, and there was and that was one thing when I got my mother's ring, my husband put on the inside, maybe it was fate. So it was fate that he came into my National Guard unit, and that's the history. We have 2 boys, so I almost cried when my husband said he wanted to be an Army soldier. So my son, my 7-year-old. So that's what he wants to do. But Thank you. I appreciate everything. Thank you very much. And thank you to my teachers.
Thank you, Jody. The next panelist is Melford Peltier, who was born and raised in the town of Allagash. Mel is the son of a game warden, and because of this spent most of his youth upriver from the town of Allagash in the woods, lakes, and waterways of the Allagash and the St. John rivers. He graduated from Allagash High School, then went on to the University of Maine at Fort Kent, graduating with a bachelor's degree in education. He then started his career as a public school teacher. In 1969, 2 years after starting his teaching career, Mel was drafted into the U.S. Army. After spending 2 years in the military, Mel returned to the classroom, where he spent the rest of his 34-year teaching career as a high school math teacher. During his teaching years, he used his GI Bill to earn a master's degree in education from the University of Maine at Orono. Mel has also been very active in the community and served as a selectman for the town of Wallagrass, on the UMFK Board of Visitors, on the Board of Directors for the Allagash Historical Society, on the Environmental Protection Agency, on the Allagash Wilderness Waterway Advisory Council. He worked on the Taylor Camp Restoration Project, and more recently on the Tri-Campus Veterans Committee. He was the founder and president of the Friends of the Allagash. For his service to the community, Mel was awarded by the University of Maine at Fort Kent the Distinguished Service Award in 2023. And recently was awarded the Spirit of America Foundation Award. May I present Melford Peltier.
I haven't worked this out with John, but I have a very bad back and a hip, and I don't think I could stand at the podium. Can you hear me back there, Alan? Yeah. Okay. My name is Melford Peltier. I graduated from Fort Kent High School in 1963. I graduated from Fort Kent University State Teachers College in 1967, and then I started my teaching career for 2 years, mathematics at the high school in Fort Kent. Also in 67, I got married to my wife, and we've been together for all of these wonderful years. And then during my college years, we got what they called a 2S rating, which was exempt from military service until you finished your college. So we knew that this was hanging over our heads collectively. And finally got drafted, and Norm and I left the same day. And on June 23rd, 1969, we said goodbye to our parents and our loved ones and took off for Fort Dix for basic training. You're going to hear something that no other veteran is going to be able to express, because when we landed at Fort Dix, and I was assigned to Delta Company, right from the get-go, our commanding officer gave us post privileges. There are veterans in here who, like Norman, he had one day, July 20, 1969. I remember that very well because my company didn't do anything that day. We waited to watch it on TV, and we had wonderful time. We had post privileges from the very first day, which is unheard of. So there was a group of boys, Arnon O'Clair from Ashland, David Michaud from Caribou, who was a nephew to Condy Liesut that many of you in here would know. Dave was, he turned 26 our first week of basic training. If you were 26, you were exempt from the draft. So there was he and a gentleman from Woodman, Stuart Woodman from Washburn, who also turned 26 our first week of basic training. But our company commander gave us post privileges, and he was in an Echo company, so we didn't get to see one another at all. The very first thing we did is we headed to the beer hall, Service Club number 1. There was 27 of us from Aroostook County that were drafted at that time. 14 of them were in my company, Company D. So we all headed over to Service Club number 1, and we started enjoying the festivities. As we're walking into Service Club number 1, I look over and I see Patrick was in from Eagle Lake. He's on guard duty. He just finished his AIT as a truck driving school, and so we hit it off. Well, he pulled his duty shift and he was able to come and find us still at Service Club number 1 8 hours later. I went through basic training. It was unbelievable. Norman stopped in the other night, and this Percy Gagne that graduated from college with us, classmate, he was my bunkmate in basic training. Stuart Woodman from Washburn was the next bunk over in the same Bay Area. Both of those guys were killed in the service, and that has been the most difficult thing for me to accept because we had 4 years of college together. We played basketball and all the sports that went on and whatnot. So that was very difficult when I found out that Percy got killed on the 23rd of March, 1970, and he was with Norman at that time. So a lot of history I will keep low about that, low key. But that's always been something I've carried on my shoulder all my life for both Stuart. When their parents passed away, I certainly made every effort to be at their services. And I remember writing to Stuart's mother. His father had passed, and when his mother passed, before she passed, I had written her a letter explaining the relationship that we had through basic training. So at any rate, it was fantastic. I can't ask for better. I met people that would come to visit me that had met my father in the woods as game warden. They were majors and light colonels and everything else, and they were hunting in northern Maine, and they'd run into my dad. And they were at Fort Monmouth or another Fort Holabird and whatnot, so they'd come to visit me on weekends because we had all kinds of things to do. And that was just great and wonderful. So then, after, excuse me, after I graduated from basic training, during that period of time, everything was all hunky-dory. Because I drove truck for my father-in-law during the potato season, I got my driver's license. In basic training, they saw that in my records that I was a truck driver. And so I had all kinds of special details, taking the CEO out for lunch somewhere or dropping him off in Wrightstown, whatever. I didn't have to go through the infiltration course because I was driving our troops, my classmates, to the rifle range for the infiltration course. So it was just fantastic. I mean, I went into New York City one weekend and visited some friends up there. Nobody else could enjoy that. Every night we had an ice cream truck come by our barracks at 6 o'clock, 1800 hours, right on schedule, and Percy would always go out and buy a quart of ice cream. I never forgot that. And he'd sit there, I can still see him leaning against that building and eating his ice cream, just enjoying it. Most of us, it was an ice cream cone or something, but so those are all kinds of good memories. Everything I have to express to you is great. After I graduated from basic training, I stayed at Fort Dix for one more cycle, which was 4 weeks long, and that was clerical school. That was my first part of AIT, Advanced Infantry Training, or individual training, if you will. So I was doing clerk work. My MOS was 71 Mike 20. Thank you. So at any rate, I ended up going to Fort Hamilton, Brooklyn, New York for my next part of the AIT cycle. Once I got there, I was stationed there for 4 more weeks, and my orders came down that I was going to be a military instructor at the United States Army Chaplain School in Brooklyn, New York. Since that was 53 years ago, you can tell that my halo is somewhat rusted. But what a blessing. None of you have had this blessing. None of you had this blessing because I was assigned there on the 31st of October 1969. On November 2, my wife was joining me for the rest of my career. Who else had that opportunity? But it doesn't mean I went through some hell in New York City as well. And it doesn't mean that I have some memories that it's taken me a long time to forget. So at any rate, I got assigned as a chaplain's assistant military instructor. The United States Army Chaplain School in Brooklyn was like a university. And there was 150 field grade officers, that's majors and above, that were going to this school for a full year. And when they accomplished their schooling, they would become post chaplains at whatever assignment they may have had, whether it was in Vietnam or Germany or France or whatever. So at any rate, I was what they call support staff to them. Whatever the instructors there needed to teach these officers, I would take care of the audiovisual materials, I would do films, I would do all of the support that they needed to provide their academics. Also driving details to Long Island University, the ones in New Jersey, picking up special speakers coming in to enlighten these chaplains. That was the main focus of my MOS, my teaching. However, I also taught a 40-hour block of instruction to National Guards people in the greater New York City area, whether they were in Connecticut or New Jersey or whatever. They would come in and there would be roughly 20 students. So with that in mind, what I was teaching was how to use an overhead projector, how to use cameras, how to use all of this stuff previous to our little telephones that we have now, that I call anti-social media. Well, you know, Betty and I got there on the 2nd of November of 1969. About a day after we were there, we lived off post. We lived with a lady, Mrs. Bianco, Mrs. White. She had 4 sons. She was living alone, and we lived in a basement apartment that she had, and she was like a grandmother to us. So we decided to go to the service club and find out how. Of course, I knew because I was already there, but Betty had questions to ask of the lady at the service desk. So we go over and look at her, and I say, this pamphlet over here, the USO Club in Manhattan, exactly what street's it on, I didn't remember. She looked at me, she saw my nameplate, she says, Pelletier, she says, where would you be from? Well, Betty says, oh, we're from a little community called Fort Kent, Maine. Really? Well, she says, you know, that's not too far from Prescal. Okay. So then, she says, do you people happen to know Hubert Thibodeau? The crowd here does. Yeah, he was a professor of ours, yeah. Well, he was my first boyfriend. Small world. 5 days later, Betty needed the car to go. She ended up teaching at PS 181 in Flatbush Avenue in Brooklyn. So she needed the car. So on Friday morning is the first time I had a car, the chance to use the car to drive down to the chaplain school. For those who were enlisted men, draftees included, they put a little orange sticker on your bumper. If it was a blue sticker, that was an officer. And when you saw a car with a blue sticker, you had to salute that car. It didn't matter if it was his wife driving. You had to salute that car because it was an officer. So anyway, I pull into the parking lot and I go in with my duty station, Tom Seymour, also 26, 24, 25 years old. Former school teacher out of Dearborn, Michigan, and his wife was with him. So Tom and I we're getting our class ready for the chaplain's assistants for an audio presentation. This major walks in. We both jump at attention. He's field grade. He's not a chaplain. The chaplains have rank. That's for pay purposes. They can't really give you much for orders. So anyway, we stand at attention. He says, as you were. He says, who's got that Dodge car parked out there from Maine there? Holy shit. I'm going in the break for sure. He said, it's mine, sir. He says, would you just take it easy? Would you just take it easy? He says, I'm from Maine. He said, I'm from Portland. So who are you? And he reaches over and grabs my hand. It's Specialist Melford Pelletier. Oh, great, fantastic. Pelletier. He says, you know something? He says, last week, he said, my father-in-law, he sells for Sullivan Fords in Portland. And he said, I was on furlough and I went with him. He said, we took a pickup to a Leonard Pelletier Jr. in West Enfield.
Lenny.
I said, that was my brother. No kidding. Well, he said, you know, after that, we drove all the way to St. Francis and we delivered a pickup to Leonard Pelletier Sr. Both not a problem. First week of December, I got a call in my duty station. The CO wants to see you, the commanding officer. Captain Huntley, I'm sorry. I report to the office, go in, do the formal stuff, as you were. Take it easy. Spoke français? We spoke français. Okay, he says, look, he said, we're just coming in, I'm new here and everything. He said, my wife, Colette, she's from France. And she's lonely right now. And he said, when I read your report, he said, both you and your wife are French speaking. He said, would you care to come over and have supper with us? After that, I mean, everything was just, it was unbelievable, the number of people that I saw. One of my greatest experiences as an educator, I attended Fort Monmouth School of Education, Methods of Instruction it was called. It was, you know, after Norm talked about going to college for 4 years, after going to college for 4 years, man, this was unbelievable. And I know that my career was built on the education I got at Methods of Instruction School. And they were Navy instructors. And since that point in time, I salute the Navy as being perhaps the best educators of all military services, because my experiences with them, and we had Navy personnel at the chaplain school, so I got to respect that branch of service. The Marines, well, you're always gung-ho, so Semper Fi. There's so much to share with you that it was just totally unbelievable. I used to, the apartment we had was right under the Verrazanos Narrows Bridge from Brooklyn to Staten Island. And a lot of my duty stations were at Fort Wadsworth as well. I would take a shuttle bus and go teach over at Staten Island as well, a military institution there. I remember I went to get on the bus the second day I was there. I really didn't know where the bus stop was, so I asked the guy that I was working with, he was a civilian. He says, well, come here. So he shows me out the window, he says, see that sign over there? So that's where you go stand, the shuttle bus will pick you up there. Fine. So being well educated, I went over. I stood there, and I looked at the sign. It didn't say bus stop, it said no standing. I said, what the heck is going on here? So I backed up and I looked. There's no benches, there's nothing, no standing. All of a sudden I saw an MP car go by. Oh wow, I better sit down. I'm in my Class A uniform, so I sit down on the curb. There's no standing. So finally, the bus comes, stops there. I get on the bus and I go home and I tell that to Betty. I said, I don't understand what's going on. So next morning, I reported to my office in Fort Hamilton, and I happened to run into Major Goodell. That was the major from Portland. I said, Major, I said, sir, what does that mean, no standing? How do they expect us to get on a bus if they don't want you to stand there? He said, that means you're not supposed to, like, if you have a car parked on Main Street, you're not supposed to pull up to the side of that car and run in and get a newspaper or a cup of coffee or something. That's what no standing means. Hallelujah, I learned something else. My entire career was great, and then I had a lot of temporary duty to Fort Dix, New Jersey. The incoming chaplains, that was another branch of being a chaplain's assistant for me, and military instructor. We'd go TDY down to Fort Dix, and we'd take the new chaplains coming in and train them in the gas chambers, the infiltration course, whatever needs that was anywhere from 1 week to 2 weeks TDY, and then we'd go back home to Fort Hamilton, and these chaplains would go on to just initiate their careers. They were replacing the field grade officers that were at the university, so to speak. These guys were going to be taking their place wherever they were as subordinates. They were lieutenants and captains and stuff like that. So as part of the career and as part of my memories, my grandmother passed away in December of '69, and my CO covered for me because I was only allowed like 5 days off, but it was December 11, I believe, and when I came home, he said, don't worry about coming back. He says, stay there for Christmas. He says, I'll sign you in on the morning report. So, fine. So I didn't get back to Fort Hamilton until December 31st. And when I reported in to my duty station, there was a note for me to pick up one of those cattle cars, drive to JFK with a warrant officer, and pick up 6 chaplains coming in from Vietnam. There were Vietnamese chaplains. So we drive to JFK on the Belt Parkway, and there's snow on the Belt Parkway and stuff, and we meet the chaplains, get them in the car, get their luggage. We're driving back to Fort Ham, and all of a sudden, these guys are chatting up a storm like, it sounds like a bunch of chickens. And they were really going right at it. And, couldn't figure out what they were saying, of course. So I looked at the warrant officer and I said, sir, I says, permission to speak freely? I said, you know, the French were in Vietnam before the United States, and I said, I speak a little bit of French, Moostown French, but I said, is it okay if I try to see if any of them speak French? So Father Trin was sitting between us, and I nudged him and I said, "Spoke français?" "Ben oui, on parle français." Well, now we had an in. So the other priest also spoke French, and there was 2 Buddhists and 2 other denominations that were there. They kept on chatting, and I said, c'est de la neige, c'est de la neige. So we get to the Jeff house where they were staying that night. We dropped them off. They jumped out of that car like kids on the playground. They went over, and the snowplow had gone by that day. You know, that much snow for us, it was sandal deep. And there was some lumps of snow and stuff. And they'd pick that up and they'd look at that. They'd look up at the sky. And finally, Father Trin came over to me and he says, "Scotch-tu quand neige?" And they thought that was a snowflake. And they were afraid it was going to hit their heads. But there again, you know, the French comes through again. Always something going on. Always something going on. And also, in June of 1970, June 23rd, as a matter of fact, Jim Markey was drafted. And I heard about it, so I said to Betty, I said, how about going to visit Jim? And we went and spent an afternoon with Jim. We took him out of the barracks, went to Wrightstown for a meal, and then dropped him back off at the barracks. So I'm telling you, nobody has had that wonderful experience in supporting something from my own profession. Being able to go to that methods of instruction school. I was recently with the president of the University of Maine at Orono, and I was explaining to her that is the best type of training I ever experienced in my life. And I know when I came back, and I believe I used some of those principles, because I used to tell the students, you can't do anything until I give you the command to do it. And then when I would say, do it, you know, you listen to me first, let me explain to you and give you clarification as to what's taking place. Let's do an example together after I'm done, and then I'm going to give you an example, do it. And that was something that was part of my entire career of being at Fort Hamilton, Brooklyn, New York. I can just go on with all kinds of stories with TDY, with Chaplain Montaudin from Louisiana. He was an incoming. He was rated as a captain. He stood about 6'5", a big man. He had been on the Johnny Cash show twice. An entertainer, unbelievable. So one night we're at the barracks at Dick's, and he says, specialist, he says, can I get a guitar somewhere? And I said, sure, Service Club number 1. So he said, can you take me there? So we go over, and he signs out a guitar, goes up on stage, and you know, there's like 300-400 guys in there. And they've been listening to the jukebox and stuff like that. So he gets on stage and he starts singing country western. Well, geez, all of a sudden, the room goes quiet. I mean, this guy can sing. He knows his stuff. So he plays a couple more, and then he says, look, troops, he says, I got to tell you a story. He says, I was invited to a consortium, he says, in Texas. He says, there was a bunch of bishops and priests and all kinds of people there. He said, I had been singing a couple of songs, and he says, I happened to look down, he said, there was a table in front of me, and he said, there was 12 nuns sitting there. He said, I looked at that, he said, okay, all of you people out there, he says, this one is dedicated to this table of ladies. So he started singing the song on stage at Fort Dix. The song that he sang there was, I didn't know God made honky-tonk angels. And I'm telling you, all of you who have served, your basic training, your AIT, your experiences in Nam, I was considered a Vietnam era veteran. And I make that plainly clear because I stayed in the United States like many others from that group that we got drafted. Sherman Weaver, some of you may not have heard his name from the college. He was a military police in California. Many of us did not leave. Dave Michaud stayed at Fort Holabird in Maryland on Army Digest because he was a business ed teacher. And he's the one that called. Actually, I was on duty that night, and he called Betty at our apartment, and that's when I found out that Percy had got killed, and then in May, late May, the 30th of May, he called back, Stewart got killed, and so those are things that I harbor in my heart, in my shoulders. I've had a hard time over the years to get over that. One night, Norman stopped me in. It was January 13. I said, you know what day today is? He said, no. I said, it's Percy's birthday. What can we do to help him? I mean, this is 40 years later. So that night, we decided we'd start a scholarship in his behalf. So I went to the office and started working on it. And they said, well, we need a minimum of $10,000, and it usually takes a couple of years. In 11 months, we have raised over $10,000 from our classmates and stuff. Just telling Harmon the other day, I just got an update. His scholarship is now worth $20,000. Thank God. Good payback for someone who lost his life. I've always felt what a great life I've had compared to those who didn't make it back. And just to share with you incidentally, those that didn't make it back, my name is Melford Joseph Pelletier. I was named after my uncle, Melford Joseph Pelletier, who was killed in the Second World War on the USS Wasp, kamikaze attack, and his body never came home. He was buried at sea. So I don't know what my parents would have called me if Uncle Maynard, Melford had lived a little longer, probably Teddy's Faller or something. I really don't know, but if you ever pass the big monument they have in front of the community center in Allagash, it's dedicated to Melford J. Pelletier, but it's my uncle, because it says KIA after. Killed in action. So with that, I don't know if I've been able to cover some of your stuff, but it certainly, to me, it was very much an interesting thing. And Norman and I did not serve for 2 years. We served for 21 months. One of the things the chaplain school did was we took care of conscientious objectors. We took care of people that were having mental difficulties and stuff. So we were processing a lot of situations that were uncomfortable for our trainees. And one of the things we did is the early outs. And I got to tell you a quick story about that. When he got assigned to Fort Riley, Kansas, from Vietnam, I got in contact with him. It was around January, and I said, hey Norm, we're going to get an early out there. I said, I've been writing some for people in North Dakota and California and stuff like that. We had a young fellow, 21 years old, sent him back home to North Dakota so he could help his father during the calving season of their farm. And I said, we're gonna go plant some potatoes with our relatives. So we came home and talked to my father-in-law about it and a couple other people. And I got back to Fort Ham and I went to the graphic arts department and I said to the guy from Massachusetts, I said, you suppose you could do this here on your paper? And so he, nice, Donald Sutherland, certified seed potatoes, Wallagrass made. Hey, that looked real nice. So I had one made up for Norman, Bernard L. Labby, certified seed potatoes. And I mailed that to Norm in Kansas. Then I got a call from my buddy in the business section of Fort Ham. Mel, what the hell are you trying to prove? I said, what are you talking about, Ed? He says, did you know that you had that made on government stationery? What are you talking about? Government stationery is a half-inch shorter and a half-inch narrower than your standard type paper. So I got on the phone, I called Norm, cancel, you're early out. Cancel, you're early out. So he did, and I did. But we had new ones made up and the path was flying colored. So we ETS'd from our military service on March 23rd of 1971. So that gave us 21 months of military duty. And we came home, and Gary, we had Jack McPhee fly us up to Big Eagle, and we were there for 3 days. We were supposed to go fishing, we didn't fish at all. So I thank you for listening to me. And
Thank you, Mel. Our last presenter is Gary Dumont. Gary was born in Soldier Pond and graduated from Fort Kent Community High School. From his childhood years, he was exposed to flying airplanes. His father, Roland Dumont, had his own Piper float plane and would always bring his fledgling son, especially when he flew to Eagle Lake to visit his colleague, warden pilot Jack McPhee. In 1969, Gary entered the Army. For the next 10.5 months, he was in flight school and then became a helicopter pilot for the remainder of his 2-year enlistment in the Army. In 1972, his 20-year career as a pilot for the Maine Warden Service. In 1992, he retired, or semi-retired, from the Warden Service and continued on an on-needed basis as a reserve pilot and instructor. Since retirement, he has spent several summers in Alaska as a bush pilot and guide. He also owned and operated Fort Kent Skidoo, a sales and service business that had been started by his father. In 2017, Gary was awarded the most prestigious award by the Federal Aviation Agency. The Wright Brothers Masters Pilot Award is given to someone that has completed 50 consecutive years of safe flight. Quite an honor. May I present Gary Dumont.
We'll do this fast because we have to be done at 3. I guess. I'm going to wing it a little more here so I can cover some of the things. How did this start, George Pooler? I was a junior in high school and I was learning to fly. And I was at a study hall and I had a couple flying magazine in my books. And George was running, and he comes up behind, he says, and he takes a magazine, and it was a full-page ad from the Army, and there was a young fellow standing there with a bunch of books, and he was watching a Huey helicopter fly by. So he took that and read it, and it said high school to flight school. And that's how it started. He said, and I started, that was in September. By the following spring, I knew that I was accepted. I had to, my God, I had to go to Portland and take an oral. The written exam I almost didn't make it. It was pretty tough. Anyway, so I ended up going to Army Flight School. December of '69, I graduated from flight school, December 15th. Of course, you knew where you were going. They weren't training helicopter pilots to go to Alaska, you know. And so I went to Vietnam. I was there a whole year. I got there, and you fly as a Peter pilot, a co-pilot for a while, however it takes. Some guys do that for 6 months, some do it for 2 months. You know, it depends how you come along. After I'd been there a couple of weeks, we flew this lieutenant in, and this lieutenant, I don't remember his name, he was from Massachusetts somewhere, had been University of Maine, and he just graduated from OCS, and he was an advisor to the Vietnamese, forces. So him and a sergeant were assigned to this outfit out in the boonies, and we took them out, and every week or so somebody would resupply them with food. And the first month you're there, that's basically what you do, that type of flying. I remember the second week I was doing that, we went back, resupplied them, and there was a rug there tied up, and there was the body of the lieutenant. He got killed the day after we dropped him off, and you know, the helicopter don't come every day. And he's tied right up, and we put him in, and on the way back to Bearcat, we took him to Dong Tam. No, we took him to Saigon, that's where we took him. And to like a morgue there. And it wasn't all over. I had to go in, because when they unwrap them, they got to have an officer, you know, and I said right then, I said, boy, this is the real deal here. And that went on like that. The type of flying I did in Vietnam, it was an assault helicopter company. You got shot at almost every day. You know, I never talked about this much before now. There's a scar right here. That was a round that come up through one of the instruments. And I felt something pick. You don't hear a round in a helicopter. You can take 15 rounds and you don't know it unless it hits something that knocks, some of the controls out or something. And my co-pilot, he says, "Frenchie, you're bleeding." He's bleeding nose. So I went like that, and geez, there was quite a lot of blood. Well, what happened, a little piece of glass had gone, and I didn't have the visor down, and it stuck there, and I went like this. Well, so that's what happened. And oh my God, that scar showed, it still shows. I could have got a Purple Heart for that. We didn't do that. Now I probably wish I would have done it. The basic training for us was the same basic training everybody went to. It wasn't fun. But I'll tell you that the flight school and the OCS part of it made basic training look like a cakewalk. It was, I was ready to quit. It was that bad. At the flight school, in the afternoon when you did the flying, nobody bothered you. Everything was great. It was pretty intense. That lasted like 5 months. Fort Walters, Texas, and come home for 3 or 4 days. Then I went to Savannah, Georgia, Hunter Army Airfield, and that's where you really got into it. Started flying the UE and everything. Come home. Went to Vietnam 16th of January, I think it was, yeah. I got a calendar here. Somebody asked me, did you cross off every day? I crossed off every day. Right here, except the 3 days that I was en route. The average age of the pilots was maybe 23, 24. 2/3 of the pilots were warrant officers, the other third were lieutenants or captains. One thing you got to remember, when you get to the flight line, if you were the aircraft commander, didn't make a difference if you had a colonel flying as a co-pilot, you were running the show. You know, that's how it was. The aircraft commander ran the show. So we flew I flew a lot. I never even took an R&R there. You know, I was 19 years old when I got there. I think I flew 1,410 hours in a year, 600 of them at night. I like that. You had, if it had come down to push and shove, somebody had to do it, and you couldn't say, no, I don't want to fly at night. But fortunately, they had a couple of guys like me that I enjoyed. I did it 6 straight months. I can remember, well, I'll tell you about it. We're there for a reason. They're trying to kill us, we're trying to kill them. I killed a lot of people. And it wasn't hard to do because they're trying to, you'd make a gun run at something at night and you'd turn around and look and the red bullets are coming back at you because they were in and somebody mentioned about free fire zone. Everything, when I was there at night, after a certain time, there's no roads over there, speak of. So everything traveled by big boats on the rivers. They were like double-end boats. They were long from here to the other wall. And some of them had a little motor. It was a motor that stuck in with a shaft. And that's how they moved supplies. And of course, this thing I flew was called Nighthawk. And it was a Huey, and it had mounted on the left side a General Electric minigun that would shoot at 6,000 rounds a minute. Of course, you could only shoot it for about 10 seconds because you'd melt the barrels off. And we had right behind it, there was a guy running a Xeon light that was about this big. It had a set of triggers. If you flew that at 400 feet over the soccer field, you could shut those lights off and this would be brighter. And you could pin it in. So, of course, they'd hear us coming, and at night, and they'd try to we'd come around the bend, and the guys would be jumping because they knew what was coming. And that guy would go zit like that, and the boat would cut it right in two with the rounds. I mean, 6,000 rounds a minute that puts out in that was tough because I remember picking up two advisors again, and how they killed them. They pulled their eyes out of their head, and so you didn't mind shooting at them when they shot at you. You got to remember the Vietnam War was 54 to 75. That's when it ran. The population of Vietnam at the time was 16 million. I didn't think there was that much. The length of South Vietnam is like from here to maybe New York, 500 and some miles long. So it ain't like it's a long, long ways. I never got to northern, I stayed right in the south the whole time I was there. And we're fighting two armies there. We're fighting the Viet Cong, which is like their National Guard. That's the farmer that would wave to you when you'd fly by in the day. But at night, he'd be trying to get you. And then the NVA. The NVA was a North Vietnamese army. They were trained. They had better equipment. It's a different thing there because I never saw it, but they thought about, they would teach these Viet Cong, how to shoot at a helicopter, to lead it a little bit. And they tell about a bunch of helicopters landing on a rice paddy, and them guys are still shooting 100 yards ahead of the helicopter. They just didn't know, And the South Vietnamese army, the guys that we were helping, we had sea rations. That's pretty good. You ought to see what they had for food. Bag of rice here, maybe a chicken that they just killed and they'd had it. It was unbelievable. And we'd just dump them out like you. They didn't ask. They jumped. Because if they didn't, they probably shot them.
You would have probably shot me.
There's so much of that. Everything was helicopter, and I'm not taking a knock at the Marines or the Navy, but that was a helicopter war. 84% of the helicopters in Vietnam were Army helicopters. 7,200 helicopters over the period of time. I can give you a few figures here. 1,300 warrant officers were killed in Vietnam. I lost some good friends. I can remember the date, July 17th. A guy named Don Crumry, he'd flown as my co-pilot, and he was one of the pilots that was my age. Most of them were 3-4 years older. And we trained him as a co-pilot, and he had just become an aircraft commander. And what we do, the more experienced pilots, we'd we'd be a flight of 5 helicopters. We'd have a guy that'd be lead, it'd be one of the senior pilots, or one of the senior guys would be in the back, and we'd put the less guys in. 'Cause you couldn't just take off, you had to be right in formation. And I watched this, and I can see it right now, and he come in and landed, and we were all one right behind the other, and we're landing on a in the rice paddies. You know how the roads went in them, and the water was gone that time of year, the dry season. He landed, and he swung the tail. When he did, it hit and that thing rolled. And it all, I see it right now, and it all, and then it catches fire, and the engine's still running because it's a turbine engine. The rotors are broken, they flew all over the place. The guys all got out except Donald Crumry. When the rotor blade hit, he was the co-pilot, and it cut off the top and hit in the back of his head. That was done. I remember that. And there were a lot of people, but I saw that happen, you know. And my first duty station, of course, after training was in Bearcat, Vietnam. I saw Joel Guimau there in the period of a year. I saw Herman Pelletier, and I visited Gary Saucier. I found out he was in a village on a certain base there in Tan An. I stopped right in, put my hand on his shoulder. Memorable experiences. There were some good experiences. You know, they don't owe me a nickel. They gave me the best training in the world. When we left Vietnam, and those of you that experienced that, and you're in that jet, and that thing rotates, the amount of yelling that went on in there was out of this world. And it was hot. It was like in the 90s. And I come home, took 2 days to get home. I got a ride with a state trooper from Bangor to Holton. And Holton, my father was waiting for me. He was still in state police then. And it was 22 below. And I had a whole bunch of stuff written. Any other questions?
Gary, thank you for your service.
Hey.
We graduated together, and anyways, there's a lot like, what's his name, Bennett Daigle.
Bennett in our class,
For
yeah.
Monmouth with him,
Yeah,
New Jersey, and he got killed in October of '70.
Yeah.
But I was on my second tour. But anyway,
yeah. It's,
thank you for your service.
did I what?
Did you guys lose a lot of choppers?
Oh my God. I can tell you a little story. My father, of course, there was no cell phone there. You'd write home. I wrote to Pauline 300 and some straight days. It might have been just a little note. You always had time. But and you wouldn't get any mail sometimes for a week. Then you'd get 4 letters or 5. My grandmother, my father's mother, she sent me a letter. She said, you better talk to somebody, find a way to come home, because your father ain't going to make it. And Dad had got a map from National Geographic and had it in the bedroom on the wall. And of course, I'd write to him, he wanted to know everything. I'd even sent him an operator's manual for a Huey. It's as thick as a Sears robot was. He knew more about it when I got home than I did. And he had pins stuck in that everywhere. And he was fighting the war. I had no clue of that. You know, but Hueys, those of you that are older remember Walter Cronkite. Every night they'd say 14 helicopters shot down today, or 27. If you couldn't continue the mission, say you took a round and you had a fuel leak and you landed, that counted as a shot down. Okay, I got shot down. I know some pilots that flew a whole year over there, never took a round in the helicopter. Some took it the first day. The most, I remember one time we had 17, I got a picture of it, 17 holes. You know, that's, and you don't feel that. You hear it if you're low enough. Army pilots fly low, the Marine pilots fly way up there. So you'd hear it. It sounded like a popcorn machine. But at night, sometimes with the Nighthawk, see, when we'd get shot at, they had tracer rounds, so about every 5th round was red, so it would look like a string of red fire coming at you, and it looked, but I found out that if you could see the flame, it wasn't gonna hit you, because the tip of a tracer doesn't burn, okay? Well, sometimes you'd see green ones. Green ones, that's 50 cal, that's about that long, that makes a big hole. You know, and, but that didn't happen often,
So if you came down with one, did you just leave the plane there?
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, I left one Huey, it was like 2 months old on a pad out on the river, not because we got shot down, there was something that went wrong in the fuel system. When it started, it wouldn't start. They had to come get that with a big Chinook and lift it out, and they come get us. But I was hauling on the Mekong River, I was lifting crates of rockets that they'd use in the gunships. I'd lift them and I'd move them about from here to Rocks from the boat, and they'd let them down. There was a little bit of an airstrip there. And I was doing that, and you're not going very fast. And all of a sudden the engine quit. And of course when it quits, a turbine engine, it winds down. There's a big red light that lights up, says master caution, and we landed hard. I just dropped the rockets, because if we'd have landed on top of that, it wouldn't have been nice. I just dropped and I was headed back to the boat. Like I say, it was a quarter of a mile maybe, and that quit, and we hit hard and set it down. You see, a helicopter, if you're going along at speed, you can set that down just like if you had the engine running. But you've got to have some speed and a little bit of altitude. I was only 100 feet high. We hit, and I can remember all that was left of it. It caught fire, we all got out, and all that was left was the rotor blades and the tail.
Yeah.
Burnt, you know.
Gary, could you comment about the dust offs that,
Unbelievable.
I don't know, was that a volunteer, or does that?
You could put in for that. They didn't fly a lot, but they flew a lot at night, and you know, they're not going to pick up people that fell off a roof. They're going to get people that get shot. Yeah. We did a lot of, there wasn't enough dust off because of the South Vietnamese. Mm-hmm. I can remember hauling people about the 4th month I was there, making a lot of trips. And maybe 4 or 5 trips, there'd be 8 or 10 guys in there. There was no stretchers there, laying right on, and the blood just dripping. I mean, the blood this thick on the floor, you know. And we didn't fly a lot of American troops. You know, actual fighting troops. By then, by 1970, the South Vietnamese were kind of, you know, starting to do a lot of the work themselves. But I don't regret anything about it.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions of any of the panelists?
Not so much a question, Don, but what I've heard today, these stories need to be told. I think there is a population, particularly a younger population, that probably hasn't, well, I know they haven't heard this, but hearing this would give them an appreciation for what service means, or what dedication means, or what commitment means. Sometimes we use big words in school, but we don't know what that means. What I heard today is what those words mean. And I think if we could somehow get this to them, somehow, I think a really positive impact. I'm just sharing that. It's very moving.
Gary, go ahead.
I've never showed this to anybody. This is the first and second award of the Distinguished Flying Cross. This is the first through the 50th award of the Air Medal. And I also got this after I'd been home 4 months. I got it from the government of South Vietnam. It's a Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry with a silver star. And
Gary, all of the veterans here, I mean, they have a story. Gary is perhaps one of the most decorated veterans that we have, probably in Maine, certainly in this town and this whole area. I have to say thank you to all of you, all the veterans that are here, and I really want to thank the American Legion for being here, for allowing us today, and for all of you to hear these stories. You're right, Adam. These are stories. They're real. You saw the emotions with some of the veterans. It was real to them, and now it's real to us. On that note, our next senior college class is coming up. Actually, it's a flying experience. How do we get to Mars? And why do we want to go to Mars?
Gotta stop at Venus.
But the next class is taught by Ben Parody, and it's why do humans want to go to Mars? And that's going to be followed shortly after that by electric vehicles. Why do we know about electric vehicles? And it's taught by somebody who has one, and going to be presenting a class on electric vehicles. And the last class, this is one that Gary will enjoy. I know he will. It's an evening of music fashioned on the kitchen parties.
Oh, Jesus.
Gary, the senior center had kitchen parties for years, and Gary was always there. Him and Pauline, every time. Enjoyed it very much. So those are coming up. Anyway, I really want to thank our panelists for sharing their experiences in the military. I want to thank the flag folding team. That was very good. Very enjoyed it tremendously. AARP Maine for having the refreshments, but for all of you for being here today. Tomorrow is Veterans Day. There'll be other activities in this area related to veterans, and really sometimes we have to stop and think and about the people. They gave up, or we gave up, I should say, something for our country and for all of us. Anyway, on that note, thank you very much for being here today. Thank you.